So, without further ado, that's all the boring stuff. And I'm going to introduce the fabulous Claire Lacey. I'm not going to tell you much about her because she's going to tell you all about herself. She should be unmuted and she should be able to share some really cool videos and pictures with you. And it's going to be all about whales, dolphins, and other mammals today. So I will now spotlight Claire. So if you all put your thumbs up, if Claire's face becomes the picture now. Are we good? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to mute me now and we're going to pass over to the fabulous Claire. So enjoy, everyone.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to talk to you today. Hopefully you can all hear me fine. I'm just going to do a quick share screen. So fingers crossed the technology plays the game for us.
Yeah.
And hopefully you can now see some slides.
We can see it perfectly.
Excellent. So welcome along. As I said, this is number 4 in the session. So if you haven't heard the other three, sorry, then that's totally fine. They're all on YouTube, so you can have a listen to those as well. Over the last few weeks, you've heard about some of the deep ocean creatures, some of the smallest and strangest things living in the ocean. You've learned about seagrass meadows, which was very cool. And last week you heard all about what it was like on a big research cruise. So today we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to talk about mainly whales and dolphins and a tiny bit about seals as well. We're going to talk about the animals first, because I know that's the bit that you really want to know about and that you're interested in. And at the end, we'll just have a very quick chat about what it's like to do my job as well. So first up, what is a marine mammal? That's what was in the title, so you need to know what those are before we start. Now, you maybe know what mammals are already. They give birth to live young, so doesn't lay eggs. We're mammals. Dogs and cats are mammals. Lots of the animals you're familiar with are mammals. So you should know, they should be pretty familiar for you, I think. Now, for us, it's pretty easy to breathe air because we live on land. But for the animals we're going to talk about today, it's a little bit more tricky because they spend all of their time, or at least most of it, in the sea under the water. So all of the animals we're going to talk about today are marine mammals, and we're mainly focusing on dolphins and whales. This picture is of a blue whale's blowhole. It's on the top of his head, kind of here. And that's how they breathe. That's what they use to breathe. It's kind of just like your nose, your nostrils. And the reason it's on the top of the animal's head is so that when they come to the surface of the water, they can breathe. Otherwise, it would be covered up by the water. You may have seen pictures like this one before. And this is what happens when a whale breathes out. You get a massive spout of water vapor and kind of where the animal's breathing through the top of the water. And most of that's air, but you can see that from a long way. Animals like whales and dolphins can't breathe underwater, so they have to hold their breath the whole time they're underneath, and then they breathe out when they get to the top. Now, Amber told you a little bit about deep sea adaptations in the first one of these sessions, and like the deep sea creatures, many marine mammals have adaptations for living in the sea as well. So they have long streamlined bodies. You can see on this blue whale here, he's really long and thin. And this makes them really efficient to swim through the water. In the bottom here, let me get the laser pointer, see if that will work. This one's a seal. It doesn't look much like a seal. When you see them on land, they look kind of big and clumsy and lumpy. But when they swim through the water, they can make themselves really streamlined too. And the same in this dolphin, you can see very streamlined shape. So this helps them. This is another adaptation, like having a blowhole on the top of the head, which helps them live in the water. Now, when you ask most people what they think of when they think of whales, they say that they're pretty big. I'm going to try and show you how big. Now, this is quite difficult on a computer screen, of course, so we're going to see what we can do, but hopefully this will help show you how big whales can get. Now I want you to imagine this is a really long tape measure for me. There's two people on there, so you can see kind of how big a person would be if this was a real tape measure. We're going to start off with one of the smallest marine mammals. This is a porpoise, and we have them around the UK, and depending where you live, you might be lucky enough to see these if you go to the beach and look out on a nice flat calm day. This one is about 1.5 meters long, so pretty small. That's how big they would be on our tape measure. If we look at a dolphin now, this is a bottlenose dolphin, and the UK actually has the biggest ones of these in the world. They get really chunky up here, and these can grow to be about 4 meters long. So on our scale, that would look like that, so quite a bit bigger than the porpoise. For comparison, there's a car, so you can see that's kind of a small, average small car. So you can see how big a dolphin is compared to that. I'm sure loads of you know what this one is. This is a killer whale, and this can grow to be kind of 8 meters long, so a lot bigger than the dolphin and the whale, longer than my car, certainly, maybe if you have a huge one. But you can see they're starting to get to be pretty big animals. Lots of people know about humpback whales. These are the ones that you sometimes hear recordings of singing and jumping. And these ones are kind of almost twice as long as the killer whale again. So these are about 14, 15 meters long. So getting pretty sizable. Now, if I was to ask you, if you all had your microphones open and I was to ask you what the biggest animal you could think of was, I imagine for a lot of you, you might say a dinosaur. This one is one of the biggest dinosaurs they've ever found. It's hard to measure dinosaurs, so they don't really know how big some of them are, but this they think is one of the biggest. And it measures 26 meters. So that is huge. But you get an animal that's even bigger again. This is the blue whale. It's the longest of the whales. It's the biggest animal that's ever lived. And as you can see, it's enormous, even bigger than that dinosaur. So now we've agreed that they're huge, we're going to have a think about what they eat. What on earth could you eat that would let you get that big? So first up, we're going to have a look at different animals' teeth and what's in their mouth. So this, quite obviously, has pretty big teeth. This whale, on the other hand, doesn't. And you kind of get two different types of whales and dolphins. Some that have teeth. Let me get my pointer again. Yeah, so some have obviously pretty big teeth, and others that have baleen, which is this kind of hairy looking stuff that's in the whale's mouth. Now, all of you whose cameras I can see, pull a face at the camera. Let me see if you've got teeth in there or some baleen. Let's pull a face at the camera. Yeah, has anyone got baleen in there, or have you got teeth? I'm guessing all teeth. So let's start with the teeth and see what, if any of this is the kind of things you might like to have for lunch. So these toothed whales, what do they eat? Well, there's 72 different species in this group, so they eat lots of different things. But one thing they all have in common is that they hunt their prey. So in the mouths of these two, you can quite clearly see sharp, pointy teeth. So these are perfect for catching their favorite food, and also for keeping hold of their slippery food. So fish and things that live in the water, they're all wet, so they're hard to keep hold of. Hands up if you've had your lunch yet today. I've had mine. It's too late. You all had lunch? So let's see if you had any of the things that these guys might have had for lunch. So dolphins and porpoises at the top, they mostly eat fish. That's what they sometimes eat a few other things, but for the most part, they eat fish. Killer whales sometimes eat fish too, but depending on where they live, they may also eat other things. So they might eat seals or penguins or other whales as well. So lots of different things depending on whereabouts they live. This animal, we didn't measure it up earlier because it wouldn't all fit on the slide, but as you can see, this is a pretty big creature. It's a sperm whale, and it's the biggest animal in the world that has teeth. You can see how big it is compared to the diver. So it's not huge like the blue whale, but it's still a pretty good size. And these animals are amazing. So not only do they have enormous teeth, they have an enormous brain, and they can dive very, very deep, so over 1,000 meters. To be able to get to the bottom of the sea, they need to hold their breath for a really long time. So that might be over an hour. I know that in the seagrass episode, you did some practice on holding your breath, and I think for an hour, we maybe not practice that because that could go horribly wrong. So you'll just have to imagine what it would be like to be able to stay underwater for that long. And the reason they do that is because they want to get their favorite food. And this is their favorite food. It's a giant squid. And you can see why they're called giant squid. Look at the size of it compared to the whale and the diver in that picture. It's like eating something that's almost as long as you for your food. Now, this is what the skull of that whale looks like. You can see it's got quite a weird shaped head. This one was just taken in a museum. The picture was just taken of a skull that's in a museum. And as you can see, it's also got the same shaped teeth, big, conical, spiky teeth. But if you look really closely, you'll see that it only has teeth on the bottom jaw. And that's not something weird about this skull. That's just the way that sperm whales are. They only have bottom teeth. So hopefully this is going to work. I'm going to try now to play you some sound. If you remember back to the deep sea talk, if you heard that one, you'll remember that Amber said it was really, really dark in the bottom of the ocean. So it's far too dark to see where you're going, and it's far too dark to see the food that you're looking for. So another one of the adaptations that whales have come up with, toothed whales, is called echolocation. All of the toothed whales can do this. As can bats, actually, but of course not in the water. So I'm going to play the sound for you now. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. The whales make a loud clicking noise and some creaking sounds. And they use this clicking noise. They make the sound and then listen to the echo. And they use that to find out where the seabed is and where food is and to generally find their way around. So have a listen. Hopefully this one works. Can you hear that? Can you do a thumbs up if you can hear? No? Okay. We're in a sec. Let's see if we can. Let me just see if we can work out how to make the sound for you. There's always going to be something. It was a good start. Let's try that again. There we go. Can you hear that now? Oh, it doesn't like it.
Claire, we can hear it now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So that's what sperm whales sound like when they're echolocating and looking for their food. So you get clicking noises and some creaking noises. Now, as I said, all toothed whales make that sound. Sperm whales make the loudest version of that sound, but these dolphins make it too. This video was taken using a camera on a pole over the side of the boat, so no one was in the water when they made this. But if you have a listen, you can hear some clicking, some whistling, some kind of creaky, squeaky sounds, and this is the dolphins echolocating, also them talking to each other as well, so kind of communicating with each other. So hopefully this one works as a video to go with this one. just streaming. Sorry, this one has to come off the internet. Can you hear the whistles? So they're pretty noisy, as you can hear. But I said there was no one in the water when we made that recording. So how do we hear them? To do that, we use an underwater microphone, which we call a hydrophone. And that's what's in the yellow tube on the picture on the left here. And we tow that behind the boat, and you can use that to listen. Just works just like a normal microphone, only it works under the water. So you can use that to listen to what the whales are saying on what sounds they're making. And then you can use the computer. You can see someone here listening to the noise coming from the hydrophone and also looking to see what that looks like. You can make that into a picture and have a look to see what it looks like as well. I've got another sound for you here. This one's a different type of dolphin, just so you can see that they all sound slightly different. There's no video to go with this one, I'm afraid, but just have a listen to some of these last few sounds. Cool, so that's the toothed whales, or at least a very quick run through some of them. And we're going to talk now about the whales that have the baleen plates, this hairy, kind of hairy stuff here, or looks hairy anyway. And as you can see, it grows out of the top of the whale's jaw. And it's made from the same stuff as your fingernails and your hair. So it's made of, yes, stuff that you can grow as well. And the whale uses it kind of like a sieve. So they swallow huge mouthfuls of water and then squeeze the water out of their mouth. And all of the food that's in the water gets trapped in these little plates. And then the whale is able to eat it. I'm going to show you a bit more what I mean. So again, different species of whale like to eat different prey species, but a lot of whales with this baleen like to eat this. And this is Antarctic krill. And it's a tiny little animal, kind of like a shrimp. You could easily fit one in your hand. So how does a massive blue whale, the biggest animal ever, eat enough of these tiny krill to survive and to get so big? Well, the first thing you need to do if you're going to be big and you want to eat tiny stuff is to grow a really big mouth. So in this humpback whale picture, you can see the whale has a huge, huge mouth. The other thing that they have is something called throat pleats. So it means that they can open up the space under their throat here into almost like a massive bag. And in this whale, it's closed, but you can see the ridges. You can see the black stripes kind of on the white tummy. And those are that's what opens up into a massive bag. And you'll see that in a minute. So how big is this big mouth? Well, underneath this elephant, you'll see here, these are jaw bones, whale jaw bones. And they're from a blue whale, again, in a museum. And if you put your hand up under your chin and have a feel here, these are the two bones that you can see on the floor there. So those ones that feel a bit like a V shape. Now, obviously, whales don't eat elephants. This is just to show you how big they are. But if you imagine on a whale, the red arrows, so this bone here, let's get my pointer, sorry. This bone here is here on the whale when he's got his mouth open. So you can see this is a huge, huge, huge mouth. So big an elephant could fit in, but again, they don't eat elephants. That's just to show you how big this mouth is. Now, this video, I borrowed off the internet. It's not one that I've been lucky enough to take myself, but it shows you really nicely, if it works, how big this mouth opens up, and you can see them feeding. So the whale, before we start, this here is the whale, and this pink stuff, my pointer's not working now, the pink stuff in the top, that's the krill that the whale's wanting to eat. So just have a little watch of this. There's no sound, so don't worry if you can't hear anything. Just have a little watch. Hopefully it works. It's got a load of the internet, so it might take a little while. But you can find this and have a proper look for yourself afterwards if you want to. So you can see the whale through the water, and it looks like shrimps that I showed you. And then it opens its mouth, and this huge kind of like throat pouch extends out so that the whale can swallow the whole swarm, or as much of it as he can, in one go. It's quite a long video, that, so we'll not watch all of it, but if you want to have a look online, you can find that one on YouTube later. So that was kind of what I wanted to tell you about whales today, just a bit of an introduction. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about my job now. And I've been lucky enough to work all over the world in some really cool places. And people think that when you do whale research, it's often all tropical and really hot. And sometimes it is, like it was in this picture. But sometimes not so much. It can also be really cold and you spend a lot of time outside. So depending where you're working, you might have to wrap up really warm. And I think you were told about that last week as well on the research cruise talk. And my job really is counting whales. I work for the Sea Mammal Research Unit, up in estimates for how many different whales and dolphins for each species we've got, particularly around Europe and in the UK. So in order to count whales, you have to spend quite a lot of time on boats, which is pretty cool. Sometimes that's really big boats, like the cruises you heard about last week. Sometimes it's really nice little sailing boats, which are particularly good because they're really quiet, so you don't cause any disturbance to the animals. Sometimes it's tiny, tiny little boats, which you use for short day trips, and those are particularly good if you're trying to get photos or to try and get close to the animals for some reason. So do you reckon this sounds like it would be a fun job? Who thinks this might be a fun job? Yeah, I can see some smiley faces. It is a fun job. I think it's a great job, and I feel like I'm very lucky. What about an easy job? Do you think it would be an easy job? Easy or difficult? I see some shaking heads, some nodding heads. So the last thing I want to show you before we go on to questions, I've got a little video here, and your job in this video is to count how many dolphins you think there are. And then afterwards, we'll go on to questions. You can put your answer for how many dolphins in the chat box, and we'll see who gets closest to how many there really were. Okay, so you watch this one. There's no sound again. And this is what it's really like on a boat. So it's not a beautiful video. This is, you just have to look out for the splashes. See, so it can be quite hard. Do you want to watch again? Do you need to have another look? Yeah, one more look. Cool. So we're going to questions now, and you type your answers in the chat box, and I'll let you know after we've seen some answers who was closest. We'll hand over to Amber to run the question session.
Cool. So can everyone hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, so I've written my answer down in the box. I can see a few of you writing yours down as well. So we've got, I said 4. We've got someone said 6. We've got 5, 7, 0, 5, 3, 7. Got all sorts of different answers. 1. So yeah.
See also. just having a quick look. So, oh, I think Ailey might be
6.
closest, and Harrod might be closest with 7. There's 9 in that video, I'm afraid.
Do you say there's 9?
I got 9.
Well, then we've got Sally and the triplets have just written 9. So well done. You are the only ones who got the right answer.
I didn't scroll down that far. Yep, 9 is the answer. I'm afraid there's no prize, but you have the victory.
Oh, well done, guys. So yeah, there were 9 dolphins. Congratulations. So you can apparently you're already trained to be a marine mammal counter.
Yeah, you can come my job.
But yeah, thank you so much, Claire. That was super interesting. Now I'm imagining that everyone is going to have a lot of questions because this is the first time that these guys have been learning in this session about anything that's like big that you see in the sea. I've been talking to them about tiny little stuff with no backbone, so I'm sure they've got lots of questions for you. So the first question, so remember what you need to do if you want to ask a question is you can either type it in the chat box or you can go into where the 3 little dots are at the bottom on your iPad or phone, and you can raise your hand, and it's a little button that you press that raises your hand, and then I know that you want to ask a question out loud. So the first question we've got is from Ethan, so I'm going to unmute you now.
What's the deepest diving whale?
The deepest diving whale, we didn't talk about that one today, so the sperm whale is pretty close, that I showed you the skull of, but the deepest diving whale, the one that's got the record, is called Cuvier's beaked whale. And that
Cuvier's what?
Beaked whale. So Cuvier is the scientist who it's named after, and then beaked, like a bird's beak, whale, and it can dive for, well, to kind of 2,000 meters, something like that, and it can hold its breath for nearly 2 hours. So those are pretty cool animals. They're like the champion divers.
Wow. How cool would it be to be able to actually dive that deep? Imagine all the things we could see. We didn't have to go down in submarines.
Yeah, all the stuff from your talk, you'd be able to see that for yourself.
Yeah, it'd be much easier for me to do my job. Thanks, Ethan.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we've got Sally and the triplets who won the dolphin counting competition. I'll unmute you now.
Hello, that was Ted who got that number, by the way.
Well done, Ted.
Right, Tommy's got a question. Go on, Tom.
How fast can dolphins swim?
Ooh.
That's a great question. They're actually pretty fast. So the fastest one, you asked about dolphins, but the fastest one is actually the fin whale, which is the second biggest after a blue whale. It's another huge one. And that one can swim, it can kind of sprint for 25 knots. And that's really fast. That's 25 nautical miles per hour. And that
25 miles per hour, that's so fast you can swim.
Yeah. Dolphins are a bit slower than that, but maybe 15. They can sprint pretty fast, so they can keep up with the ship easily.
Thank you.
Good question. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we've got Amelia D. So I'm going to unmute you now and you can ask your question.
Do you catch blue whales in fishing nets sometimes?
So not on purpose, but people do sometimes catch whales in nets, not so much blue whales, but...
And they call it a right whale when they catch it.
No, a right whale's a different type of whale, but they do get caught in nets all the time. So that's a different type of whale, and they get tangled up in lobster fishing gear. But even in the UK, whales get trapped in nets. It happens quite a lot, so you have to be really careful not to throw ropes and stuff into the sea. Stuff gets trapped by accident.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Amelia. Okay, so next up, I think we've got Aaron Kennedy's got his hand up, so we're going to unmute you now.
I'm sorry. Oh, what do you need to study at school to become a marine biologist?
Oh, good question.
That is a good question. So I studied biology when I was at school and maths. And then at university, I did a marine biology degree. And then I did a master's in conservation biology as well. But there's lots of different ways that you can do this. So one of my colleagues who's on the chat here, he did physics and lots of maths, and he writes a lot of the software that we use to analyze the whale calls. So depending what kind of things you're interested in, if you're interested in biology, you can do it that way. If you're interested in maths and physics or computer coding, you can do it that way. So there's lots of different ways you can do this, depending what you like.
Great question, Aaron. Thank you very much. Okay, next up we have, I'll go through the chat because we've got some questions coming through in the chat now. So Daisy would like to know, how many different species of whale are there?
So there's about 90 altogether, and I say about because people, they find new ones surprisingly recently. They found a new species just last year. So kind of 89, 90 different species, and 15 of those are the big whales that eat the tiny food and have the hairy baleen plates, and the rest are all whales with teeth, dolphins with teeth.
Wow, I bet you guys weren't expecting it to be 90, were you? That's a lot of whales in the sea. So on a similar question, thanks for your question, Daisy. On a similar question, Flo would like to know how many different types of dolphin there are. This is testing your your species knowledge here.
Well, the 90 is whales and dolphins are all together.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a strange question to answer that, because some of the things that are classed as, or kind of count as, it's a bit of a blurry line between what's a dolphin and what's a whale. So there's 90, let's say 90 all in, of which 72 have teeth and 15 have baleen. So that's the best answer you're going to get, I'm afraid.
That's a good answer, thank you. Okay, we've got another one in the chat. We've got, how big can dolphins' teeth get? So how big are they? I guess from the smallest to the biggest, what kind of size are people having to think about here?
Yeah, so for a porpoise,
that's Isabel, by the way, sorry. Oh no,
the smallest ones would be, I'm trying to find something on my desk that would be the right size to show you. So
you mean you don't have a dolphin's tooth on your office desk?
If I was in my real office, I would have, but I don't. I'm sadly not in my real office. We'll start with Aaron's screen sharing.
Oh, there we go.
So the smallest ones, I haven't got anything very small, but they would be really tiny, so smaller than a pen lid. Yeah, I have nothing suitable on my desk to show you. So imagine maybe just like the kind of just the very top of the, oh, you can't see that very well, the very top of the pen, tiny. And then the sperm whales are the biggest, and they're huge, so they might be kind of that size.
Wow.
They're so big that in the olden days when they used to hunt them, the whalers used to the teeth and scratch art onto them. So they used to make drawings on them. They were big enough to make carvings in.
Cool. So yeah, imagine a sperm whale's mouth, how big it must be if each tooth is like this big. That's huge. So yeah, good question. Well done, Bethan. We've got some questions coming through as well for people with their hands up. So first of all, we've got Esme. I will unmute you now.
What is the biggest threat to whales?
Ooh, good question. Thanks, Esme.
That's a really important question, actually, and there's lots of different ones. So one of the most important threats to whales, like many animals, is actually climate change, because things are moving around in the sea. So you lose ice melts, and so all of that krill I showed you, that so many of the big whales rely on, that needs ice for its life cycle. It only lives in the Antarctic, and it's tied very strongly to sea ice. So if the sea ice all disappears, that krill will disappear, and then the whales that eat that will have a real problem because they won't have anything to eat. But other things bad for whales are noise in the sea from shipping. You think the ocean would be pretty quiet, but actually there's a lot of noise in the water, which whales don't it's not very good for them. So you heard how much they use echolocation and how they use sound to communicate with each other. So if the sea's really loud, they can't hear each other and they can't echolocate, and it can also cause damage to their ears as well. So that's bad. There's actually quite a lot. It's quite sad, but yeah, plastic pollution, obviously, like many things that live in the sea, that causes a problem. People still hunt them in some places. And like we talked about before, fishing gear, discarded fishing gear and working fishing gear can be a real problem. So that was quite a long answer. Sorry, there's quite a few things.
There are, but all of these things we can, as individuals, we can do things about them, can't we? So that's the positive. You know, if we walk and cycle lots of places instead of driving places, obviously not at the moment because we're all inside anyway. You know, if we try and make sure we're recycling all our plastic and not using single-use plastic, we're not travelling unnecessarily. You know, there's lots of things we can do to try and to look after the whales and the other animals in the sea. So although it's sad that lots of things are happening, hopefully, you know, you're the adults of tomorrow, so you can do something about it, because we've all been a bit rubbish, so you guys can do something about it. So has that answered your question, Esme?
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so next up we have got Charlie. So I will unmute Charlie now.
Hello. What's your question, Juliet?
Do giant squids live in lakes?
That is an excellent question, but they mostly live in the sea. They like to live in the deep sea. I think there's only one that lives in a lake in a particular book.
How's that? Has that answered your question, Juliet?
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next up, we've got another question from Ethan here. Hang on, let me see if I can. Oh, it's not letting me unmute you for a minute. There we go. Off you go, Ethan.
What's the biggest predator to whales and dolphins?
Ooh.
Whales and dolphins don't really have any predators because they're so big, with the exception of killer whales can sometimes kill other whales and dolphins. So apart from killer whales, nothing much eats whales and dolphins. So they occasionally get a little bit of a nibble from sharks, but it's mostly just killer whales. That's one of the bonuses of being really big.
There we go. If we lived in the sea, we'd all want to be whales and dolphins then, so we can be king of the sea. Thank you, Ethan. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the chat now. We've got loads of things coming in now. We've got, hi Claire, we want to know how many types of dolphins and whale that you've seen yourself.
Oh, I actually don't know the answer to that. I'd have to make a list, but I think I'm up in the 20s, 30s, I think.
Wow.
Something like that, but I'll have to work that out and put a note in the Facebook group later. What
was your favourite one that you saw? What was the moment where you were like, oh, I'm so glad I got to see that one?
Everybody always says killer whales. I really like to see killer whales, but there was also, I showed you a picture of a black and white dolphin, which has got kind of an hourglass pattern on it on one of the slides, and it's called the hourglass dolphin. And they only live in really weird places that are hard to get to, so down near the Antarctic, but you have to be pretty lucky to see them. And I think that's been one of my favourites, just because you can see killer whales if you go to the right place, but it's really hard to find hourglass dolphins. So I think that would be one of my favourites.
Oh, that's really cool that you've got to see that. Okay, we've got another question here. So, if you're not great at school subjects or don't want to go to university, are there other ways that you might be able to work with whales and dolphins?
So definitely, there are some fun things you can do from home. Maybe not with whales and dolphins, but with seals and penguins, which is almost as good. So if you go online, this is a really good activity for now when you're trapped in the house, actually. If you go online, and there's a website called Zooniverse, so I can put the link in the Facebook group later, and they have loads of pictures, aerial pictures of lots of different animals, and you have to count them. It's to help with the research project, but anybody can join in. So if you fancy counting some penguins or counting some seals, that's a really good way to get involved without even having to leave your sofa. So that's really fun, and anyone can do that. Even anyone can have a go at that. You just need to get online. If you are able to get out a bit more, so not one for now, but there are lots of charities that do citizen science projects. So if you're having a walk around the coast, maybe it's a bit easier in Scotland or in Wales. There's not so many places in England, but if you're in a place where you see whales when you're out for a walk and you see them in the sea, you can log your sightings on an app or on the internet so that people can see where whales are showing up, and we can collect extra information that way. So that can work really well. There's lots of charities where you can volunteer to help out. So yeah, check out some of those. And again, I can put some links up to some of these organisations in the Facebook group later. So there are definitely different ways you can get involved.
That sounds awesome. Thanks, Claire. And then we've got another question in the group. It looks like it's from Finney that says, how far can whales echolocate? So I guess that's whales and dolphins, but how far can they echolocate?
That's a really good question. And that depends on the different species. And it also depends on how noisy the sea is. So that's another reason why it's important that we don't make too much noise pollution and make the sea too loud. So sperm whales, the ones I showed you, the biggest ones who can dive for a really long time, you can hear their echolocation clicks for a really long way, maybe 10 kilometers or so, a really big distance. But the smaller animals, they make much higher frequency sounds, and so the sound just doesn't travel so far because it's a much higher frequency sound. So that might be 400 or 500 meters for a dolphin, but it depends how noisy the background is as well. Because obviously, as you know, if you're standing in a really noisy building site, you can't hear yourself. You can't hear yourself talking. So it's kind of the same for them too.
Cool, thank you very much. And then I did see that Amelia had her hand up earlier. Have you changed your mind, or I'll unmute you in case you have a question to ask?
I want to do it on the chat.
Oh, that's fine. All right, I will let you type it in the chat. All right. Okay, and then we've got another question from Ethan. Ethan.
What's the biggest species of dolphin?
Well, the biggest dolphin, now, depending on how you define dolphin, you could say it's the killer whale, which is kind of like, it looks quite like a dolphin and it's in the same family as dolphins. But the biggest animal that's called a dolphin is probably the dolphin that I showed you, the one that lives up in Scotland, and that gets to kind of 4 meters, about that size. So about as long as my car. I know you don't know how big my car is, but it's, yeah.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting to see how difficult it is to give everything a name. Things keep getting put in different groups, and yeah, it's all very confusing when you become a biologist, isn't it? Everything's put into different groups with different names, and then people argue about it and they move around, and some people like to call it some things because they always have, and so science isn't always very clear cut like everyone thinks it is. Okay, we've got a message in the chat. Oh, this is a sad one, but interesting. Why do dolphins end up on the beach?
Yeah, that is a good question. And it can be for a whole pile of different reasons. So maybe it's already sick, and it was, it might have died at sea and just ended up on the beach just because the tide brought it there. Sometimes they strand just because they're in the wrong place. So a lot of the species that we see stranded, if you think of the things that you sometimes, that we've had in the UK recently. So you get pilot whales sometimes strand, sometimes some sperm whales have shown up. And these are whales that really like deep water. And if they get into somewhere that's quite shallow, like the North Sea, they're not able to feed. They maybe get a bit disorientated. They get really hungry because there's nothing for them to eat here. They start to get confused and sick. And so they can be maybe lost. Sometimes animals end up on the beach because they've had a really big fright. So if this happens with, again, particularly whales that like to dive really deep, but if there's been a huge amount of underwater noise, like in a big explosion underwater, or maybe some sonar testing or something really loud and frightening, and the whales don't know what it is, they can get really, they can get frightened and come to the surface really quickly, and then they get the bends like human divers, and they can end up stranding on the beach from that as well. So it can be lots of different reasons. Sometimes, lost, but it's it's not normally good news, obviously, because they don't want to be on the beach.
Okay, so I think that is all of the questions I've had through at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to ask a question that I want to know the answer to, and that means that you have about 2 minutes to either type your final question in the chat or put your hand up and say that you want to ask a question. Oh, we've got one hand up already, so I'll let you ask, Ethan.
What's the fastest species of dolphin?
I don't know the answer for specifically dolphins. So the fastest species all in is the fin whales, like we said before, but I don't know which of the dolphins is the fastest. There is a species called the Spinner Dolphin, which can do some very cool things. You want to have a look at it. So when that one jumps out of the water, it can spin. Oh, I have a fluffy way. So you imagine this is a dolphin. When it comes out of the water, rather than just diving like that or doing, you know, you often see them jumping, it can spin all the way around like that as it jumps.
Cool.
It's
That's
maybe not
really cool.
a very cool.
That sounds like you need to go and Google that, Ethan. You need to go and look up a video of a spinner dolphin, because that sounds pretty
Okay.
awesome. Okay, so we've got, this is an interesting question, given our conversation the other day, Claire. I think, so it's from Jenna Williams, and if I scroll back up, I think that is Flo asking this question. Do you have a pet? Now, there's a picture of a fish, so I don't know if they're asking specifically, do you have a pet fish, or if you just have a pet? But given our conversation the other day, I think you're going to give an interesting answer.
I don't have a pet. I don't have any pet fish, sorry. I do have some pets. I have a dog who's hiding in the kitchen, so he didn't bark at the moment. And I also have 2 cockatiels who are banished. They're very, very noisy, so I've had to hide them in the room as far away from here as I can so that I can talk to you in peace. But I do. I have 2 little birds as well. Yeah, a dog and 2 birds.
Yeah, I rang Claire the other day to plan this session with Claire for you guys, and I could hear all these amazing birds in the background, and it sounded like she was in a tropical country or something. It was amazing. So yeah, good question. Thanks, Flo. And then we've got a final question here from Amelia again. So I'm going to unmute you now.
What's the smallest species of octopus?
Ooh.
Oh, I have no idea. I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know very much about octopus. I know that you do get some tiny ones. And
I meant squid.
oh, you meant squid. I don't know very much about squid either, but you do get little tiny bobtail squid, which are maybe this big. So you do get some. I don't know if that's the smallest, but you do get some that are very small. So they go from that big to up to 12 meters, like in that slide that I showed you.
Thank you.
That might have to be another Googling one. World's smallest squid, and I reckon you'll get a really cool picture and video come up from that.
Exciting.
Thanks, Amelia. Okay, so I think that's all our questions. So I have my final question, which is kind of irrelevant, but I really have to know, over your right shoulder there is a calendar. What is the picture on your calendar?
1 second and I can show you. It is a whale picture.
I assumed it was, but I couldn't quite make it out.
Yeah, so there you go.
Oh, cool. So it's jumping out of the water. I was like, has it got something around its neck? Is it? I was very confused.
Coming out the water, yeah.
And what are the species over you've got a picture up over your left shoulder. Can you tell us what those whales are?
Yeah, that's a fin whale and a blue whale in that one. So the blue whale is the bluer one at the bottom and a fin whale on top.
Awesome. Right, well, I think that's been everyone's questions. So thank you so much for joining today. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute you all at once. So this is going to go crazy. And I all want you to shout thank you very much to Claire. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Amber. For another great session.
Thank you very much to you guys too. Oh, Aaron, I can see you've got your hand up. Is this because you want to ask a quick question?
It's not a question. It's more of like a fact.
Oh yes, please share a fact with us.
It's about squid and octopus.
Go on. Yeah.
Oh, go on, let us know.
The deepest, like, ever squid or octopus is called a Dumbo. Wait, I don't know if it's a squid or an octopus, but it's like Dumbo.
Dumbo octopus, yeah.
Octopus.
It is. That's really good. Some really good facts there. And yeah, so Dumbo octopus. I'll see if I can find a video of the Dumbo octopus to put on the Facebook group. It's very, very cute. It's pink, as I'm sure Aaron knows because you'll have seen it, and it has little ears. They're not actually ears, but they look like little ears. They're little fins, and they're on its head, and so it looks like a little elephant Dumbo, and it moves its head like this and sits in the deep sea. So yeah, that's really good knowledge there.
Yeah, I saw it in Guinness World Records.
It is. There you go. So I will try and share a video of Dumbo octopus for you guys as well, so you can see it in the Facebook group. But yeah, so thank you everyone for giving such an enthusiastic thank you to Claire. She's really been fab today, and she's actually told you about the big animals that live in the sea, which is lovely. Hang on, there we go. Just making sure that I can actually exit this meeting for you guys. So thank you very much. Next week, we have someone coming along who's going to be talking to you. We've gone from like the really big, amazing animals with Claire, and next week we're going to talk about literally some of the smallest living things that live in the ocean, called microbes. And you've got someone coming along, an expert, to talk to you about microbes. Most of them are so small you can't even see them without a microscope, but they're really, really important to our oceans and for us to be able to live on this planet. And so that's why someone next week is going to come and talk to you about those. So I bet that's something you'll never have learnt about at school before, and you'll be able to ask him lots of questions about that. So same time next week, and I will post a video of the Dumbo octopus on the Facebook group for you, and then I'll ask Claire if she can share the videos she was showing earlier so that you can watch them again if your internet was making it a little bit slow. So thank you very much, guys, and I will see you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.